Welcome back. You know, if you have an M1A or a Garand, you might very likely have a little bit of play in that peep sight. You can hear that on my microphone. Now, it happens in varying degrees, but most M1As and Garands will have some degree of wiggle in that rear sight. That wiggle can certainly, it will amount to loss of accuracy on the range. Let's talk about how to fix that and do it in the professional way that it ought to be done with precision. Let's step over the bench. So how much play are we talking about? Well, with this rifle here, and they're all going to vary a little bit depending on the production of the sights, but I'm going to use my mid-Utoyo calipers, and I'm going to measure here. With the sight at its lowest position, I'm getting a deviation of, goes from 55, I got to get it positioned so it doesn't move, going from 56 to 68, possibly 70. I'm not in a solid fixture here, but that's a good idea of what sort of movement I'm getting at the lowest position. The trouble is that these rifles are not generally shot with the sight at the lowest position. It's usually from at least 10 clicks up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Or that would bring it to 200 yards. Let's go to 300 yards, another 3 clicks. 1, 2, 3. Let's see what we get now. I'm getting movement that's easily in excess of 20 thousandths of an inch. Now that's substantial, because 8 thousandths of an inch back here subtends to 1 minute of angle. So you can multiply, divide, and see what when you have 24 thousandths of an inch, that's 3 MOA. 3 MOA is an incredibly large loss of accuracy that we can fix, and we're going to fix it very nicely. Now, these are not the instruments to fix a device which is related to this. This is not a manhole cover, and it's not a horseshoe. You don't adjust it with hammer and cold chisel and adjust it with files. This is a precision instrument, and it needs to be treated as such. You're not going to see me attacking this with anything that's going to beat it up. What you're going to end up with is imprecise methods that are going to physically ruin a nice instrument. This is a standard M1A, and a standard M1A, naturally, in order to keep the cost down, you know, this is a stock sight that hasn't been fitted, and how they fit a national match sight at the factory is neither here nor there, because I'm going to show you how to fix it, which is going to be at least as good as that, if not better. We begin by removing the sight from the rifle. So using a good fitting screwdriver, and I happen to have one that lights up here so I can see what I'm doing. On the windage side, this side right here on the windage side, you'll see there's a slotted screw. That attaches to the pinion that runs all the way through the sight. Hold on to the elevation screw and back it off. It's going to pop every time it hits a detent. Just keep unwinding it until you feel that cap screw will finally disengage from the threads, and once it does, that pinion will pull out and just continue to thread it out, and that removes the windage knob. And you can see there's an outside thread on that windage knob, and there are raised portions right here, and those correspond to the detents on the side of the rifle receiver, and those are the engagement points to give you your clicks of windage. Remove the pinion, by simply pulling it straight out. And this is very much a rack and pinion system, just like on a European sports car years ago. So you've got the pinion on this side, and on this side here you've got the rack that travels on the pinion, and that's what gives you your precise elevation. So we'll set those aside for the time being. We need to remove the sight body. To remove the sight body, you have to first of all detach the spring cover. Get a screwdriver here. A spring cover should be easy to remove. Put a protective surface underneath there. All you want to do is just simply support this sight because it's going to pop off. Lift straight up, and that disengages the spring cover. The spring cover is right here. Now, one of the fascinating things, I kind of enjoy going to the blog sites just to for entertainment, to see how much nonsense there is out there. I've seen so many times where people have this misunderstanding that this somehow or another is influenced by the spring cover. There's hardly any influence of the spring cover upon this traveling system right here. They don't have much to do with one another. This is operating all on its own, and is simply traveling straight up and down within this track right here. That's all it's doing. There's no friction involved, and that spring cover is only a dust cover that retains the rear sight in place. That's all it is. So what you've got here now is this degree of, you can see this, that's quite a lot of slop. Now, in years past, shooters would oftentimes, in order to correct it, in matches, they would sometimes resort to some of the simplest remedies. They would wrap a piece of elastic band, rubber band, around one of the windage knob or the elevation knob, and at least hold it in one steady position so that it was uniform up and down. And they always knew that it was, it looked rather strange and curious, but it was a very popular way of managing things, and it worked. Sometimes gunsmiths will employ shims made of fly tying lead wire, which is used for tying nymphs. They'll simply run the lead wire down inside there and fill up that gap. And then sometimes guitar string, steel guitar string, has been used to shim the sides of that. Those are the good methods which have worked, and they reduce the wobble, but they can be imprecise, and you can still end up with a degree of play which is not favorable to accuracy. We're going to fix that, though. And the simplest method of all is glass bedding. More exactly, we're going to use JB Weld. And it's not going to be glass bedded, it's going to be steel reinforced epoxy. And what this will result in is a very, very smooth, gliding, absolutely solid rear sight that has no travel whatsoever. So let's begin. All you're going to need is, first of all, some simple kiwi shoe polish, neutral. I guess it wouldn't make any difference if you use colored, but neutral is my preference for doing this sort of work because it doesn't leave any stains behind. And you need an acid brush. You can get these in the plumbing section of the hardware store. I used to pay 50 cents for about 100 of those. Now they're, I think, about 75 cents a piece. That's inflation for you. That, and make sure that when you get the JB Weld, that you get the original formula, the cold weld formula. This one here, it's a longer setup time, but this one here is much, much harder and tougher than the quick weld. The quick set is it's fine for a quick job. If you happen to be in the field and you needed to get it done before the next match, that'll set up very, very quickly, and it'll give you a solid mount so that at least you can get done with your match and get back to business. But this one here is long term, and it'll stay put, and it's very hard, so it won't soften and cause distortion of your sight. So this one here has a set time of 4 to 6 hours and a cure time of 15 to 24 hours. Let's begin. I've completely washed and degreased each of these parts in plain dish detergent, but I'm going to follow up using alcohol, and I want to remove all traces whatsoever of contaminants. No oils whatsoever should remain on there. You want to be able to have a good solid bond on this part, on the sight body. And by the way, if you know, another good agent is plain naphtha, which is lighter fluid. And for those of you who fellow cigar smokers that like to fill your Zippo lighter up, you know, it's rather than buying a small little bottle of lighter fluid, you can get a gallon can of Coleman white gas. That's naphtha. It's the same stuff. So fill that little bottle up with Coleman white gas, and you've got exactly the same product at a fraction of the cost. I'm always trying to pass along cost-saving alternatives. So we've got that part thoroughly degreased. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing with the sight. Make sure I completely clean off both surfaces. Also to clean off the Peep, because it's important. We need to apply wax that will adhere so that the wax will protect it from any adhesion. Now to the sight, we're going to apply a good film of kiwi shoe polish. You can also use butcher's wax. Whatever you use, make sure that you get apply a good thorough coat to it. Be sure you get inside this groove. Absolutely imperative that this wax is applied to all surfaces, because if it should adhere, you'll have a permanently affixed sight that's never going to move, and then you have to go out and buy a new one. So it's very simple to do, and also get it inside the rack. And apply it also to the sight itself. You don't want to have any epoxy grabbing hold if you should accidentally get it on there. So let that thoroughly dry up. Avoid any clumps. You don't want any clumps in there, because that will cause voids in your epoxy. But once you've got that thoroughly waxed up, let that set aside for about 5 minutes, and then just do it one more time. Okay, I'm making my second application after that dried for a little while. Doesn't have to dry for a very long time. And remove all those small clumps. Make sure you get it on the end here. And again, make sure you got it thoroughly on the underside. That'll do it. We'll give that just a little while to dry up. And if you're in a, it's good if you do this where it's somewhat cool, so that you don't have that wax staying soft on you. So that's it. We'll set that aside, and we'll start preparing the next step. All right, I'm just preparing a simple non-absorbent surface so I can make up my JB Weld. Now these, you've got the epoxy and you got the hardener. These are made up in very simple 50-50 amounts. So little doodad on the end here, that's what you poke the hole in. Never mix up these caps either, because that'll cause That'll cause deterioration of your epoxy very, very quickly. You don't need much. We're only going to be using just 1 drop of each of exactly the same quantity. So that's my hardener. And that's the epoxy. I think I probably got a little bit more of the latter. So make sure you put the right caps on. You don't have to really rough this up. You know, on the epoxy tube, it'll tell you that, you know, for better adhesion to rough up the surface with sandpaper. But you don't need to do that because it's going to adhere to this sufficiently. Remember, it's only going to be providing a shim, and the site will glide inside that, and it's going to be perfect. But you don't need to rough it up. Just make sure it's cleaned out and that you have no contamination inside those tracks. That's all. Now just mix these two together absolutely thoroughly, and leaving no unmixed substance. Equal amounts. You're only going to be using a fraction of this, but you want to have enough so that you can get a good visual on the quantity used. Now when you see no more swirls inside, and that it's all a complete gray compound, that's it. I like to mix it for pretty much an entire minute to make sure I have it thoroughly mixed. This amount right here, can you see that? That's all we're going to be using. Do not use excessive amounts of this because you're going to be JB welding your site together, and stay out of that center track right there where the pinion interacts with the rack. Just bring that straight down inside that track right here. It's going to fill up nicely. That's all we need to do. Do not get over industrious with this. Now it can be applied to, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, there's 4 surfaces there. You have both inside that track, and you have the top and sides right here along this side. That's all you need to do. And then the same thing with the other side. You can also put this in a vise to give you a little bit of, if you don't have a steady hand. Just stay away from that track. You don't want to get any epoxy down inside there. If you think that you've gotten any epoxy, like I did here, a little bit too much, pull it back, get it away from that. All right, we're ready. Now that you've got the epoxy on both sides of that track, here's the fun part. Be sure that you're putting your sight in correctly. Make sure the Peep sight goes to the top side of the body, and just slide it straight down in without wiggling side to side. And at this point I like to take a little bit and just make sure that it's worked down inside this track right here. Now go about removing any excess. That's why it's important to apply that wax to all parts of that peep sight. Yeah. Clean up any excess that you have on the sight. Don't be rubbing that because you're going to be taking off the wax. Just remove any excess, that's all. Now we're going to set that aside. We're going to set this aside for a day. But we're going to come back in about 4 or 5 hours, and we're just going to move that sight down just to release it. We're not going to apply any serious pressure, but in about 4 or 5 hours, we'll just simply push that sight down just to be sure that it's not binding. So we'll be back when we do that. Okay, we're 3 hours into it, and the temperature is just about 67 degrees. That's a relatively cool environment, so curing time is going to be a little bit longer than it would be if it was in a hot area. Test at this point, at 3 hours into it, I'm still quite tacky. It's not transferring to my finger, but it's very tacky, so don't disturb his sight until you can push down on that and lift up without and then at that time we'll trim off any excess. So we'll leave it be for another couple of hours. All right, now we've got a plastic epoxy here that's not really grabbing my finger anymore, and yet it's still soft enough that I can dent it with my thumbnail. That's just about the right time to trim off any excess. Let's go ahead and do that. Just takes an X-Acto knife, a nice sharp one. Now we want to avoid doing anything that will pull that epoxy out of the track. All we're doing is slicing it. Make sure your X-Acto knife is very sharp and just slice away. It's a good time to trim it up because once it's hardened, it's a whole nother story to get it off. We'll continue to do that, and we'll leave this alone for an entire day. Give it at least 1 day, 24 hours, and don't have to get too busy with this. It's just a matter of getting off that excess amount so that it'll trim up later, especially off the part where you did not have wax. We didn't put any wax on this, so it's a good time to just trim it off of there without disturbing the bluing. Same with the other side. And take a look around and inspect carefully and make sure that you don't have any dollops someplace that you won't be able to get off easily later. Again, don't go inside that track and try to be too fussy. Just all we're doing mostly is to get it off of the non-protected steel, the part that doesn't have the wax. That's it. We'll see you tomorrow. Well, it's been over 21 hours since I made this mix, and I can't make a thumbnail impression. This is hard. So I would say it's mission accomplished. Let's take a look. Oh, look how nice that moves. Look how nicely that moves. It slides nicely, and there's no side-to-side wobble whatsoever. Oh, that's beautiful. Completely eliminated the side-to-side wobble. It's exactly what we wanted. You can see how that has filled in the gaps 100%. Zero tolerance all the way up to the top. And this is only going to get harder as time goes on. But let's install that back into the rifle. And okay, this area is not going to see daylight for a long time, so we'll apply a little bit of rust inhibiting oil in here. And this is a very light grade oil, but it's a good rust inhibiting oil. And that'll soak into that parkerizing, provide good protection for a long time to come. Because obviously this is not something that you take apart very often. This is a oil that I have for my air rifles, and it's a very good rust inhibiting oil, but it's a good penetrating oil, so that it gets into the parkerizing. It'll stay there for a long time, and it's not attracting. It's not the sort of oil that's thick that will attract contaminants like dust and whatnot. So we'll do the same thing to the spring cover. This will soak in and actually dissipate shortly. Wipe a little bit of oil on the sight itself. This is a steel. These are steel components, so long life ahead. Now, I'm not taking that apart. There's no reason to take that apart at all. That's working the way it is, and with anything that's been so-called glass bedded, the best thing to do is to just simply leave it together, because once you take it apart, it will increase the tolerances, and that's exactly what we fought against to begin with. So we'll just install it as it is. And here's the dial. I'll also be applying just a little bit of lubriplate to the friction surfaces. Lubriplate is recommended by manufacturer for friction components with the M1A. You know what lubriplate actually is? It's calcium and mineral oil together. So basically, it's crushed bones or crushed oyster shells or whatever constitutes calcium that they have on hand, and mixed with mineral oil. So it makes a very good friction protection. I'm just going to apply a little bit of lubriplate. This is 130 AA. Don't need to go too aggressive on this. Put a little bit on here and then wipe it around with one of my brushes. That's sufficient. You don't need to have too much. Lubriplate is a very effective lubricant in small amounts. And a tiny bit also to the thread. Of course, as the thread winds around, that'll spread it too. And finally, we'll apply a little bit of lubriplate to the friction sides of the receiver. Helps reduce wear on the bearing surfaces there. Do the same on the other side. Now, I've often spoken about over lubrication, but these are hidden surfaces that are not prone to attract contaminants. Now we're ready to install the sight. Simply insert the sight body, and again, don't take it apart, just leave it as it is, because the wax on that sight will protect it fully from any corrosion, and eventually lubrication will get right into that. But you don't want to take it apart because that will weaken that. It'll open up that beautiful zero tolerance that you work to achieve. Once it's set in place, you don't drop this down into the lower portion. That's not where you want to put it. You want to put it in the upper recess. You can see where it's made for it, and just set it right in place. Take a flat bladed screwdriver, and pressing not against the body of the sight, but against the spring plate, hold down on the spring plate as you push in firmly, and you'll hear that snap. That means that it's set in place. Now this wiggle right here will be taken care of once we get the pinion in. Now here's your pinion. Remember that the pinion goes in with the elevation side into the left, and coax it in by manipulating that pinion to engage the rack. It's going to be tight. It's going to be tight. You watch that sight go up and down now. So now we screw this windage side in with the thumb screw until it doesn't go any further, and you can see how beautifully that thing rides up and down, just as smooth as could be, and without any side-to-side wiggle. Very nice. I'm not going to force that because it's only been 21 hours, so we're going to let that really cure. And hold the elevation. Now this is important. This screw right here will engage. There's a flat side on that shaft, so that has to engage that. Once it does, everything will come together. So turn that until it comes to a dead stop, which is right now. Now at this point, the knobs will not turn because you've completely seized it. So back it off at least one turn, and probably two is better. Not a turn, but to the detent. There's a detent there. Now I've got elevation adjustment, which is very firm. If I go back one more, it's still quite firm, but it's a little bit easier on the friction surfaces. So now my windage turns nicely, but with resistance. Now is the time to adjust your windage so that your scale on the back zeroes out. Turning left, in other words counterclockwise, turns the sight to the left, and we're all done. I think that was a very, very nice job, very easy to accomplish, 100% zero defects. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and God bless.